Næst á svið eru þau Shirin Richter og Barry Katz með erindi sem heitir Designing with, not for, the case for participatory design in healthcare. Þau Shirin og Barry gáfu nýlega út bókina Healthcare by Design og við erum afar heppin að hafa fengið þau hingað til lands sérstaklega svo þau geti deilt af sinni viðamiklu reynslu. Og örstutt þau á ensku. Shirin Richter is a healthcare innovation leader and a senior partner at Future Medical Systems, a transatlantic consultancy specializing in guiding cross-functional teams across public health, inpatient and outpatient care, clinical trials, digital therapeutics, electronic health records, life science, and medical product development. Barry Katz, Professor Emeritus of Industrial and Interaction Design at the California College of Arts. Barry has worked for more than 20 years with IDEO, the global design and innovation consultancy, and continues to consult with governments, companies, and academic institutions worldwide. His writings on design as a strategy of innovation have appeared in many academic, professional, and popular journals. Shirin and Barry, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. We're very, very excited to be here on your beautiful, beautiful island in your beautiful country. And I've heard about the horizontal rain in my last visit, and on this visit I experienced it. It's like, wow. I live in Germany now. I grew up in Germany, and we have a lot of rain, but the horizontal rain, that is really unique. So, before we start, just a very quick question about people in the room here. How many work in the clinical setting? So you are doctors, nurses, you're like on the front line, all right? Look around, note who's there. Okay, then how many of you are in the startup world where you come up with new ideas? Okay, wonderful. And then who are the people who are more on the payer side, insurance, the people that actually kind of foot the bills? Okay, so we have some people here. So look around, and when you network, gather those perspectives, because we're going to be talking about how to include all the stakeholders in the room. All right. There we go. All right, so we were already introduced a little bit. Thank you very much. I'm very, very honored to be here with Barry. Barry Katz and I have known each other, oh gosh, now we're dating ourselves for many, many years, like over a decade. And we've worked in multiple capacities, actually together at California College of the Arts, at IDEO, and wrote Healthcare by Design together, and that's also why we're here. And Barry will also share more about him later. Or do you want to talk now? Later? Okay.
Yes?
Yes, okay. Go for it.
Excuse me. Okay, so this one, yes? Are you going to say something about why don't you speak about the book?
Perfect. So, Healthcare by Design. It was like this effort where we tried to capture what we've learned over these decades. And we said, let's just write it in a way that people can actually apply our learnings in multiple contexts. And our first book was a prototype, and we realized, wow, it's become like a door stopper. It's way too thick. Nobody can put it and slip it in their pockets and say, oh, I want to read this. But it also takes a village to write this book. And we have here all our co-authors, and it was Barry, our fearless leader, who guided us through this process. So as co-authors, we're here, and Simon Moa was with Stanford Hospital at the time and pioneered by actually saying, we need to write this down. This is just too good. We got to share this. and my colleagues from Future Medical Systems, so Rob Lister, an engineer by background, Kara Harrington, a service designer, and then your very own Svava Maria, who is with Landspitali with the Ministry of Health. And fun fact, you're also going to have a case study in the book about Landspitali. And we have some people in the room who worked with me on the dialysis patient journey. Yes, Manda, wonderful. So we have that case study in there as well. So that's the reason we're here. That's the reason we're doing this joint keynote, which is probably also a little bit unusual, but we thought we're gonna experiment. And that's also the spirit that we've really experienced here in Iceland, is the bias to action, the moment of let's try something out, let's be brave and courageous, and really step into this new world of data-driven design that we just heard so wonderfully presented. So, we have a lot of goodies for you on the way. So have your cell phones ready, all the QR codes, you can download materials. There's something specifically for the startup communities, others that everybody will benefit from. So for the audience today, we have the PDF of Healthcare by Design. I stepped into a bookshop and I realized how expensive books are here. I was like, good thing we have a PDF, so no shipping cost for you. And what's unique about this book as well is that we published it with University of Toronto Press and Rotman. So it is peer-reviewed. We had lots of our colleagues and other people in the innovation field look at it and really say, is this the standard that we want to put out there today about innovation in healthcare? And we're very proud and very happy that the book appeared in June this year. So it's like very fresh off the press. Great, so I'm going to take a break. I'm going to hand over to Barry. He's going to focus on why good ideas don't always stick. I'm sure you've experienced that as well. There's some really great idea, but why is it not seeing the light of day? And then I'm going to come back and talk about how do we make these ideas stick by including people into participatory design methods.
Thank you.
There we go.
She's great. So I will give a very brief introduction to me as a prelude to some stories that I want to tell. I spent about 40 years in a design group at Stanford, and then got in a fight with the dean of the engineering school, and I quit, and I moved to College of Art, Architecture, and Design. And then the dean quit, so I moved back to Stanford, but I was having so much fun at the art school, I combined them. So I'm not 160 years old. That's important. And then I decided it was time to retire, so I announced my retirement, and Berkeley called, and I started teaching at Berkeley. So I'm still trying to retire and not doing a very good job of it. That's what the 3 places that I've worked at look like on the inside. At Stanford, I describe it as the only design school in the world that does not teach design. We teach design thinking, and the point of it is those are not design students. They are from the medical school, the law school, the business school, the engineering school, and they come and learn how to solve their excuse me, I get very emotional when I talk, how to solve their problems in the manner that designers solve ours. The art school is very hands-on, and Berkeley is some kind of combination of the two. Okay, that's just by way of background, and I wanted to actually start with a little bit of an anecdote. I don't know if any of you are tennis players, but I've always admired Roger Federer, not just for his ground strokes, but he's such an elegant and gentlemanly player. This last spring, Federer gave a commencement address at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire in the US, and it was called Tennis Lessons. And it I was drawn to it because I like him, but it surprised me. He did not say anything about how to execute a perfect backhand. His presentation was 4 lessons that he has learned as a tennis player. And this inspired me to think about 4 lessons that I have learned as a writer. So I'm going to share some, not tennis lessons with you, but 4 lessons in grammar. And I know in Iceland, most people speak English better than I do, so you probably don't need it, but I'll do it anyway. So here is the first of them, first of four. Lesson number one is, and this applies to innovators in every domain, I think, and nowhere more importantly than in healthcare, don't use a noun when you can use a verb. Why is this so important? It's actually extremely important, as illustrated by this story. I've been traveling every year to Ukraine since the war started and teaching in one of the universities in Lviv. And I happened upon a short video clip of a group of Ukrainian nurses transporting freshly hatched babies into a bomb shelter in the middle of a Russian air raid. So what's going on there? If you look rather closely, I know it's a kind of a grainy photograph, but under the circumstances you'll understand why. They're carrying this prematurely born baby in a tiny little blue sleeping bag. And that sleeping bag actually has its origins in the group that I worked with for all those years at Stanford. We have a course taught by my former colleague, now retired James Patel, called Entrepreneurial Design for Extreme Affordability. Sorry, long title. And the challenge given to those students, graduate students from every discipline, is to design a product for somebody who lives on under $10 a day, which accounts for a fairly large number of people on planet Earth. So this particular team tackled the problem of premature birth in underdeveloped countries. There are about, I think, 20 million children born every year prematurely. And I've seen some of these kids, though they can fit on the palm of your hand. It's heartbreaking. And about 4 million of them will die in the first month of life. So the main problem that these kids face is staying warm. It's maintaining body heat. And when you're very, very small, you're losing too much heat through not enough surface area. So the students tackle this problem, and what we tell them is don't design a noun. Don't try to design a thing. Think about a verb. What is the objective? How might we achieve a certain objective? And that's actually just shifting the whole grammar of the problem in really dramatic ways. If you're thinking about a thing, you already know what that thing is, and you want to make it a little bit bigger or better or smarter or cheaper. But if you're thinking about a verb, what would be a better way to achieve our objective? It's like lifting the lid off of the problem in a really dramatic way. So the 4 students involved in this particular project, we tell them, you're not going to solve it at Stanford. Get out of the classroom. They traveled to Nepal, one of the poorest countries in the world, marched into the main pediatric hospital in Kathmandu, expecting to see almost no technology and very few trained people capable of using it. They were shocked by what they saw. Plenty of technology, $20,000 incubators donated from the US and from Canada and New Zealand and Japan and maybe even Iceland, I'm not sure. And plenty of trained people who knew how to use them. But what was missing were babies. And that is because most of the prematurely born babies in that part of the world are born in villages. And they may be a 2-day walk from the nearest clinic. And if they can get to a place that has an incubator, it's been sitting outside in the dust and the sun, and parts are missing and nobody knows how to use it. And anyway, there are only 2 hours of electricity every day. That is not the solution. So that was their insight. It was back to Stanford and beginning a brainstorming and ideation exercise, which led them to a number of experiments. Could it be in the form of a little tent or a backpack or something like that? And they came up with the idea of a tiny sleeping bag that and a plastic sleeve containing a phase-change material, which, when dipped into boiling water, moves from a kind of a solid to a gel, and then slid into the sleeping bag. It's enough to keep a newly born baby at body temperature for 8 hours without electricity. And then what happens when it cools down? You take it out, you dip it in water again, put it back in. and the baby has another 8 hours of life. So it's a real lifesaver. The last time I looked at their website, the company that they founded, Embrace Global, believes that they have saved the lives of, I think it is 700,000 babies in 22 countries around the world. And I was deeply moved to see it in operation in Ukraine. So what's a learning from that? The learning is, don't think about a noun, because that locks your thinking into a certain form factor. Think about what is the best way to solve the problem that you're facing, and this is a particularly inspiring example of that. There were a lot of learnings along the way, one of which was the first version of the sleeping bag was white, because if you walk into Stanford's neonatal intensive care unit, everything is white. It's hygienic, it's sanitation, it's cleanliness. Do you know what white symbolizes in a Buddhist culture? I think I heard it, death. So handing the young mother a white baby warmer is like saying, here, this is to bury your dead baby, which is a very bad message, so they made it blue. And Sharon is also able to tell you the stories that they learned in India, where new mothers or expectant mothers will often flee the hospital to go back to their own homes rather than the homes of their in-laws, and they discovered that for cultural reasons, they needed to train the expectant mother before she gives birth rather than give it to her afterwards, because they don't know where she is otherwise. So a lot of ideas there, some stuck. There were a lot of learnings, some didn't stick, but the bottom line, think verbs, don't think nouns. Very quickly now, second lesson in grammar. We're always told when we're writing, don't be so damn egotistical. Avoid the first person. I, me. And that applies to designing in the startup space generally as well. So here's a story that is another kind of an inspiring one. This is a beautiful photograph, right? Acoustical ceiling tiles. And the story behind it is that there is a small hospital in St. Louis in the US called DePaul Health Center, which had the idea that they would like to innovate the patient intake process. So they hired us at IDEO to help them think through it. And one of our researchers, my very dear friend Christian Simsarian, checked himself into the hospital, feigning a foot injury, in order to appreciate for himself what other people are going through. Again, we are not designing in the first person for ourselves. We are not the user. So you have to understand the experience of the person who will be affected by what you are doing. So he checked himself into the hospital. It was not an emergency situation. They did a triage, and they put him on a gurney in a hallway and said, just wait here. Everything will be fine. And when nobody was looking, he pulled out his video camera. This was 20 years ago, as you can see from the technology, and filmed what he saw. And when we finally presented it to the CEO of the hospital, they sat down around the table quite expectantly to see what this great design firm had come up with. And I wasn't part of it, but the royal we, broadcast an image of ceiling tiles. And wait, another 30 seconds of ceiling tiles, and people are starting to squirm. 5 minutes of ceiling tiles, and the CEO of the hospital gets up and says, I get it. So that was the experience of a patient. And it led to a series of dramatic interventions in how we might improve that otherwise pretty miserable experience. So that was some ideas that stuck, some ideas that didn't stick. Let me just very briefly give you 2 more lessons, and then I will pass things on to my beloved colleague. Lesson number 3 is it's actually okay to mix metaphors. Like, we're often told that you can't do that in good writing because people will get confused. But here is a story about mixing metaphors, and I would prefer to use a slightly different term, which we have just heard, interdisciplinarity, working with other people from other domains because nobody, excuse me, nobody owns the problem. Everybody owns the problem. So this is a story that began at an academic research institute once affiliated with Stanford, called the Stanford Research Institute. And there was a biomechanical engineer who was also a physician named Philip Green, who had an idea for a robotic system that could use what we now call machine learning to visualize objects and pick them up with a robot. You can see his technical skills were not very great. But he had the idea and he began to experiment with it and play with it. And it was ultimately decided that for all of his intellectual and professional gifts, he was not the person to carry it forward. So it moved on to a second tier of the innovation process, from the initial very, very technical inspiration to the hands of an industrial design group. It's called Lunar Design, now in San Francisco, actually now part of McKinsey. And they proceeded to create an immersive workstation environment that would enable a physician to sit in this kind of Nintendo apparatus and perform surgery remotely. Everybody was experimenting at that time with minimally invasive endoscopic surgery. There were learnings from that, one of which was female surgeons didn't like it very much because they are pressed up against that nasty little thing. Don't need to go into detail there. But it was a generally very good idea, and it led to the next stage, which I suspect some of you may be familiar with, the Da Vinci surgical robot developed by Intuitive Surgical in Sunnyvale, California. And the two learnings that came out of that, the two ideas that really stuck, along with several that got quite unstuck, were the need for multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration across the entire process, in which people are working with experts, with domain experts from other fields, and domain expertise itself, as it turns out, is not sufficient to handle the complex real-life problems that we have. Second feature of the interdisciplinarity is the initial designers developed a really good system, but in the first iteration of it, they focused almost entirely on the surgeon sitting in the workstation, to the neglect of other members of the surgical team. And again, we're always going to be talking about more than one person, more than one patient, more than one caregiver. It's an entire, we heard the word ecosystem already. So in the first iteration of it, the surgical assistants were tripping over heavy copper cables. They were banging their heads on the robotic arms. They were tripping on things. And then the monstrous Herculean task of cleaning the damn thing. Sorry, grammar lesson. So in the second iteration of it, which you are now seeing, there are multiple improvements. Okay, finally, the last message, and this is the one that I want to use to hand things over to Shirin. We've learned to think not in terms of nouns, but in verbs, to mix our metaphors and so on. Try to use adjectives in your work. And what I mean by that is think about making something better and not necessarily making it the absolute best that God has ever seen. That may come later. But I'm struck by a drawing that was created by a couple of our colleagues at IDEO quite a few years ago. And the caption of it is Ways to Grow. And the insight here is that there are a lot of people in the startup world, and not just in healthcare, but across the board, who are imagining, we're going to create the next iPhone, and we're going to swing for the fences and create something so entirely new to the world that people will be utterly shocked and we'll sell 1 billion of them in 30 days. There are times when you want to do that, and they are, unfortunately or fortunately, very rare, but they're very inspirational when they happen. That's the iPhone, and that's the Tesla, and that's a few other things. But there are a lot of other times when we want to think not in terms of the best, but making something better. And that is a perfectly respectable and perfectly legitimate thing to be aspiring to. So we have presented here a kind of a schematic way of thinking about when you may wish to be satisfied, not satisfied, but aim for a small incremental improvement in what already exists, or simply expanding the user base for something that already exists, and that may be something more ambitious and maybe the next Tesla or the next iPhone. So with those 4 grammar lessons, I will thank you for your attention and hand things over to Shirin.
Thank you. Very good, amazing. Thank you, Barry. What a treat. So we know that you have a lot of capacity to take in information, so we're going to let you drink from the fire hose today. We're going to start off with, unfortunately, a few lessons that have been learned. According to CB Insights, 34% of startups that have been in their post-mortem of over 100 startups actually fail because of the second reason, which is no market need. Now, when you take those grammar lessons and you take what we heard from Marcus about like the patient centricity, you're already on a really solid track, but unfortunately, it's a little more complicated. I have a second piece of bad news. You all work in healthcare. In healthcare, there's even more complexity to it. Now, my work and the work with Future Medical Systems is mostly based in the US, and now, since I moved to Germany, also in Europe. But it's the same. It's like 4 people going out to dinner, where one person chooses the restaurant, one orders the meal, one gets to eat the meal, and one pays for a meal. Now, keep that in mind as you're designing, because all your solutions are terribly fragmented, unless you kind of have that holistic perspective that we heard now from multiple examples. Now, there's some good news here, so take your phones out, and we'll share all the QR codes later as well. Our friends at CIMMYT at Mass General in Boston, Massachusetts, they've come up with a healthcare business model canvas. And that canvas allows you to really, I studied Latin in school, and you know when you have the declination and you go through all the different tenses, this is like eating your vegetables. It's not fun, but you just got to do it, and it's very healthy. So if you are a startup, do that exercise, carve out some time, because it talks about who's the economic buyer, who are the end users, what value proposition are you going to make, and why should a payer be paying for it, and how is this going to be regulated? So very, very complex, but good news, there are tools. The other good news is, as a startup, you are in a phase where confused, and this might not sound like good news, but it is good news, you're confused about what is your product, you're confused about your customers, and you're confused how to make money. And the reason why I'm saying it's good news is because you're still in the process of iterating your idea and finding out how you're going to do customer discovery and customer validation. So you should be familiar with Steve Blank, Lean Startup. If you haven't read that book, go read it, and keep iterating and keep changing it. So these tools we're going to give to you on the way, and here we have, again, and we'll mention it later as well, this was the very first prototype, so our book also evolved from very thick to slimmer. This one has a lot of great tools in there, so don't read it in one go, but kind of look for things specifically. Here we have our ebook, and if you do prefer the physical copy, this is the link to download it. I brought to you not 4 grammar lessons like Barry, but 5 rules of thumbs. So I'm going to give you the overview. Oh, before I do that, you might be thinking, why was in the introduction life sciences? Why was there also AI, digital health? And the reason for it is, as we're designing a solution for healthcare, it needs to meet the user needs, the people needs, all the stakeholders. So no matter where you are and what you are working on, these still will be applicable, slightly differently, and you have to adjust them, but they will apply. So here's the overview, and we'll go through them with lots of examples and case studies. We have context is king. So you have to know, what are the workflows? Where are people when they use your solution? What are the questions on their minds? You want to identify your stakeholders, especially the hidden ones. And the first case study is about the hidden stakeholders, the people that weren't as clear on your radar. The third one, turn your assumptions into tangible prototypes. So once you make something that people can look at, it's going to be so much easier to have a conversation about it and to change it. Include your stakeholders at every step on the way. So show ideas, not when they're finished, but when they're rough. When your thinking is half-baked, when you're like, I don't know, this could go into multiple directions, that's when you want to include people. And again, like the 4 people that go out to dinner. And if your current prototype looks nothing like the prototype that you started with, then you're on the right track. Okay, now we go into details. So the first rules of thumb. Context is king, and identify your stakeholders, especially the hidden ones. So we worked with a diagnostics startup in California, and they said, we have this wonderful technology, we can do liquid biopsies. So instead of when a patient has sepsis or like a really strong infection and you actually have to take a sample, and in the past you had to culture it and it takes like a few weeks, and during that time the doctor just tries out multiple antibiotics, hopefully one of them will work. They had figured out a way, liquid biopsy, the DNA fragments, we can tell you what's most likely as what causes the infection. Now we need a provider portal where the infectious disease specialist can access that information, download the report, and then know what to do. But nobody's using it. It's a bit strange. We have this portal. Maybe we just need to make it bigger and better, which would be a huge UX investment, as well as kind of thinking through all the different scenarios and what information is needed. So we spent some time at Stanford Hospital and looked around, and we're like, okay, so who logs into this portal? And very quickly we ended in the basement of the hospital with the blood lab staff. And it was one person who was logging into many of these portals that were designed by these startups, logging in and then printing out the report, faxing it into the EHR system, and being like, what I really would like to have is a higher contrast so it actually shows up properly. And that was the hidden stakeholder, the person who does that, the person who doesn't log in was the infectious disease specialist. And it turns out in the US healthcare system, in hospitals, infectious disease specialists are consulting physicians, so they're consulting the attending physician, and the attending physician most likely doesn't have internet connection in the hospital to even access anything on their phone. So the challenge here was really, okay, how do we make this better? And what that resulted in was a shift from resources. Let's not have this fancy provider portal. Let's focus on what are the reports, what can we download, how can we get that information into the EHR? And the result has been remarkable. The company has reached 400 US hospitals and really kind of converged a lot of hospitals in the system. So the hidden stakeholder. If you work with medications, go to the units, observe how do nurses, in this case, retrieve information. Oh, it's a high alert drug, you need 2 people. How does that change workflows? Don't make it more complicated by adding something fancy to, in this case, it's the Pyxis device. And it prompted the nurses right in this moment, please count the Colace in tray 28. Colace is a stool softener. It doesn't need 2 nurses' attention before they can move on. If you're in the OR, make yourself familiar so that this feels like your every day of work and not in your office, not away from the context. You really need to breathe it, and then invite people in. So this was actually the project that prompted the book with Stanford Hospital on medication safety, and what you see here is a nurse representative, someone from the patient council, a farm tech, someone from pharmacy, and they're all adding their ideas. We had no idea what we're designing at this point, but we shared with them what we heard, and they told us, but there's a little bit more of a nuance here that you missed. Of course we missed it. We are not from the field. We're just observers, and with their input, we're making it richer. Already on rule of thumb number 3, turn your assumptions into tangible prototypes. Now, it doesn't only happen to startups, and I'm going to share with you a story from one of the big guys. And the quote by Mark Twain, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, but what you think you know. Pfizer worked on inhalable insulin based on the need of people have a fear of needles. And yes, even a more recent study, so Exubera hit the market 2007, older story, but even like a more recent study shows that over 63% of patients experience needle fear. So it's like a really validated human need. But what happens when you don't make those ideas tangible? What happened was they launched a drug, they had 500 prescriptions in the first 6 months, it was considered a flop, the idea was like, ooh, you know what, well maybe it's gonna pick up. It later was taken off the market also for some safety concerns, but the patient and provider acceptance was a huge piece of it. And why is that? As one grandfather said, well, I used to have fear of needles, but now I need to hide in the bedroom when I take my insulin because I don't want to tell my grandchildren that it's okay to smoke a bong. We laugh, and yet these things can happen to all of us, and they happen when we don't make our ideas tangible. So in the creative process, we want to define the right problem to solve. In this case, it was fear of needle as one of them. But then we also want to solve it in the most elegant way. And this is where the devil is in the detail, and this is where the larger frameworks don't hold up. This is where you need to go into the context and really get your feet wet and be humble and realize, no, you actually don't know until you show it. Another way to look at this is when we just talk about it, hey, inhalable insulin. Everybody has the perfect inhalable insulin in their head, but nobody can actually touch it and engage with it. The moment we create a prototype, and we could have just, as Tina Selig, she's a professor at Stanford, says, she says, take your recycling bin, dump it. That is your material for prototyping. You don't need anything fancy. You can take a paper towel. I mean, even the difference between a paper towel roll versus a toilet paper roll, being like, hey, what do you think if it's longer, if it's shorter? Just these little things start making it tangible, and you can start having conversation. One of the problems is you think like, oh, I don't look good if I take a paper prototype and show it to people. And as Barry Cates says so lovingly, it has to feel a little bit like preschool. Then you're on the right track with prototyping. Or as our students here at California College of the Arts, this was right before the smartwatch came on the market, they already had iPhones, they were like, we're gonna design this exercising equipment, and you can exercise at home, but you can see your friends on the video screen. And we're like, okay, just prototype it. So they used rubber bands, stuck it like with a little bit of padding on their wrist, did some exercise, and we're like, oh, I can't see the video screen, and it's really wonky. Yeah, maybe we're not going to do it. And that is a really valuable step. So prototype to also get rid of ideas. Or, as co-founder of IDEO, David Kelly says, fail often to succeed sooner. So don't be afraid of making these steps that go in the direction, and be humble about it. If you're not from the hospital and you work with people in the hospital, show them your idea and be like, you know what? We actually don't know, but we tried out these multiple directions, and is there anything that you like? And if not, build on it, make it better. And in terms of cost, you start off with many ideas that are very low resolution, so recycling bin, preschool, that kind of feeling. And then as you're evolving, your ideas get fewer, and also they get more refined, and obviously the price tag goes up. But none of these ideas have to be looks like and works like. So it's totally fine to, on the one hand, be able to do a tech demo, but on the other hand, have paper prototypes and show what that flow could be like. 4 and 5, include your stakeholders at every step of the way. And if your current prototypes looks nothing like what you started with, you're on the right track. It should feel like this. You start somewhere, you think it's a goose, you end up, it's a fish. And sometimes you go multiple times back and forth, and that's okay as well. But allow yourself for that transformation. And create those mock-ups. So I talked about when it feels like preschool and you show these ideas. Here we were working with a startup that had developed a sensor for running. And their thought was like, oh, we're gonna put this in the shirt, and then we go have these people check their running posture, and it's going to be a great idea. And we're like, you know what, let's take some of these ideas into the field and just show them to people and see how do they respond. We took an old running shirt. These are just tape, painter's tape. So we put it there in a nice looking pattern and had that as one of our prototypes. We didn't only have this one, so you always want to have multiple prototypes. So when they tell you this is ugly, this is ugly, this is ugly, at least they find one thing that they feel like you're corresponding to. And in this case, we showed this to this ultra marathon runner, multiple Ironman athlete. And he looks at it and goes like, oh, it'd be so good to get feedback on my watch of my running posture. And then he paused and he was like, yeah, but I wouldn't buy it. I'm like, why would you not buy it? It's a shirt. I'm like, what does it mean? It's a shirt. And he's like, do you want to know how many shirts I have from running events? I have them from the favorite ones I store and actually use, the other ones in a box in the garage. I'm like, okay, so he's not throwing away any of his running shirts, but when he gets up in the morning, he gets ready for training, he's like, oh, I think I need a boost. I'm gonna use the Honolulu shirt because that was such a great race. So he uses those shirts to boost his motivation. If there was a sensor in it, he would not ditch that, because for him, having that motivation was way more important than having that sensor. So what that resulted in was a sensor that was embedded, because they were working with a textile company, it was embedded in the waistband, and also it was a clip-on sensor that you could clip on your pants. And with that product, they were really successful in their launch. Another way to look at this is also with information here. Here we're in the hospital. The posters here show the evolution of how we communicated about medication safety. You see that transition, like they don't look the same. Here it might be more smaller changes, and yet it's an evolution. And the big flip was, you see in the middle one, the nurse on the computer. So when it was about medication safety, but we wanted to talk with the parents in this children's hospital, Stanford Children's Hospital, the question was like, oh, it shows a nurse. So when we talked with parents, they were like, I'm not gonna look at this is for staff. So we're like, oh, we have to speak a visual, like a different visual language. So our graphic designer, Soren de Orlo, put birds on it. He was like, okay, fine, we're just gonna put birds on it. And all of a sudden, people started seeing the information. Last case study for you is about how all these different rules kind of come into play. So I was working with this clinical trials study startup, Gobalto, acquired by Oracle, and we were co-developing this SaaS, so software as a service, with a paying customer. And one of the things that we really had a struggle with, and I'm bringing this up for the startups here, because you need an organization that opens up and shares the information with you. In this case, our customer was this clinical research organization, and we really wanted to know what are all their processes. They're not going to show this to us. They're not going to let us in. So we ended up signing this partnership where they got the first privilege, so to speak, that the thing we were designing was really meeting their needs. So that's what they were in for. But with that, we ran a huge danger, and that is if you just design for one organization, how do we make sure it also fits the industry? How do we make sure it fits across clinical research organizations and not just the one that we were designing with? So partnerships are great. They allowed us into the cubicles where we got to see people working on clinical trials. This is like the Excels. And when we asked them, well, what would you like? What are your needs? So we're like, another tab on the Excel and also more colors, because I actually run out of colors all the time. Now, yes, we would make it better, but our goal was to improve the communication and moving it into the cloud. So this is 2012, so cloud was a big thing. So moving it into the cloud. So we talked with them, and at the same time, we're observing, we're like, you know what, these are needs that they're saying, but these are needs that we're noting down. It's like, how do you kind of keep track of all your different studies? We did another piece with them where we actually had them map their studies, not from a content point of view, but from an emotional point of view. So if this is a journey, when does the weather get rough? Like when you have horizontal rain, when you have like winds that are like so high, and what are like moments that you really celebrate? And there we got a very different understanding of what a clinical trial looks like for the people who are managing the trial. And then as a last step, we said, okay, so now that we have our prototypes, and you see this is paper, of course we had it digitally. Of course we kind of had already started fleshing things out, because we have audiences that need to see the tech. But for this audience, we actually printed it out on paper, like screenshots, to make it look less refined. And the reason is, when we show something on a screen that's digital, people go like, okay, yeah, I like it, and they think they can't have any input. Here we're giving them like different colored pens. You see that thick Sharpie. It's like, mark it up. Another good one is a red one. Like just grade it. What do you think is good? What do you think is bad? And with that, people were invited. The other thing that happened was because of that one clinical research organization, we asked them, you know what, you have some colleagues who left to other organizations, just invite them in. So we are literally sitting at a Starbucks here in the Research Triangle in the US, in North Carolina, and we have multiple people who are friends but work at different organizations looking at it. And our job became sitting back and observing, oh, which words are they struggling over? Oh, hang on. And they had interesting to say, what, you call this this? Well, we call it this, but that's confusing. So we had them hash out the language. We had them come up with this one prototype that they could agree on, and it automatically elevated us to a level that could be used industry-wide. So, and with that, also another big shift happened. While initially it was one tracker for one clinical trial, it became very clear. People go to their computer, they switch it on in the morning, and they're like, which of my many studies needs my attention? So it's not about like one tracker, but it was about a productivity tool. So how do I know what to do today? And where are my fires? Like, which ones do I need to put out, and which ones have a little bit more time? And the last part, when you do your research well and you include people along the way, you're gathering your marketing material. So we had the marketing team just kind of work closely with us, and they were like, yeah, improve risk mitigation, keep studies on track. So all the language that we heard from the users that were able to surface in the marketing material, and hence made the product very successful, and then which led to the acquisition by Oracle. So here are your 5 rules as an overview. If you don't know what you're working with, and who, you need to do your homework. You need to step into the place and really say, you know, I don't know, I'm here to learn. Have that beginner's mindset, that curiosity, and just allow yourself to fail. And as you're failing with the prototypes, you're shifting towards the right direction. If you find yourself stuck, that's like another moment to be like, we're like just doing like little iterations, let's push for some new directions. We have a goodie for you from Future Medical Systems, and that is if you're a startup or anybody working on any innovation, feel free to book with us a strategy session. So there's a calendar linked to this. Feel free to sign up for that. We'd love to support you. We'd love to support the innovation in healthcare that's happening here in Iceland. And in case you missed any QR codes here, they're all at once. All right, thank you so much for letting us share our stories. It was a real pleasure to be here with you.